Welcome to Sam's Russian Adventures. I'm Sam, an English guy living in provincial Russia, living in the city of Vladimir, but right now I'm going for a walk in the village where I'm building a house. It's much more peaceful here, even though the car just zoomed past me there. Once you get further down into the village, it's very, very peaceful. And it's obviously a nice day, snow on the floor, so I thought we'd go for a walk and talk about the topic that everybody is talking about now. And that is, of course, Donald Trump, Russia, Ukraine, and everything else. So right now, at this moment in time, yesterday, Donald Trump came out and said that Zelensky is a dictator and it's his fault that the war started, and how he wants to solve it and end the war. And Europe is going crazy right now. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing. I do feel a bit sorry for Europe. Now, don't bite my head off. No, I'm not pro-Europe and anti-Russian. I'm very pro-Russian, and I'm really, really pleased about the situation right now that Donald Trump is meeting, or has already met with Russian diplomats, and they're already negotiating an end to this war. Because what this is actually showing is, if a president wants to get stuff done, he can. And it's, you know, we've had all this talk about how, you know, Biden wants to end the war, how Europe wants to end the war, right? They've been talking about that for ages, saying they want to end the war. But it just shows that if they really wanted to end it, they would end it. It's actually more likely that they didn't want to end it and they wanted it to continue as long as possible. But we'll get into that in a minute. Now, I feel sorry for Europe, and the reason I feel sorry for Europe is because back in 2022, when all of this kicked off, now I know the origins, you know, going way back, I know it all, but I'm not going to go that far back in this video. Let's start with 2022, and let's remember that it was America who wanted more than anyone for this war to go ahead. They did everything to make this happen under the previous American administration. And Europe initially were not really that keen, because they wanted to continue buying cheap Russian gas. They didn't want to have to make sanctions which were going to harm their economy. But they did that because America told them. And so they followed America's decision, and then now they're buying, obviously, American gas, liquid gas, basically, for 4 times the price, right? So they followed what America told them to do, but then now America done a complete U-turn and left Europe on their own. And for Europe, you know, Europe only feels big and important because they're with America, right? And so they could make loads of statements about, you know, supporting Ukraine to the end and doing everything to make Putin lose the war, which was never going to happen, right? But they could come out with these statements about supporting Ukraine and doing everything it takes, even though their economies were really struggling because of it. And they were happy to say all this stuff because they had America's back. They had the backing of the US. But then, obviously, America under Trump have done the complete U-turn, right? Complete U-turn. And now Europe are like, well, hang on a second. We can't really do this on our own, can we? We were acting all brave and saying we'll do everything to support Ukraine right until the end, right? They were saying our goal is to end the war. We don't want the war, but we're here to support Ukraine into the end. And now that kind of America have basically said we're pulling the plug, Europe are kind of like, damn, what do we do now? Because we can't back up the rubbish that we've been talking about for so long. And the only reason they obviously started the whole thing backing the US, because they were backing the US, but now the US has gone and they're kind of like left in the hole that was dug for them. And I've said for a long time that it's really stupid, because Europe never thinks for itself. Europe only does whatever it thinks the US wants. And then this time the US has done the U-turn, right? And Europe are screwed. Just walking up the main road of our village before I can take another turn into another quiet street. And I've actually started a 30-day challenge, 10,000 steps a day. It's not that difficult, to be fair. especially when you're making videos, because you can walk along, you can talk to the camera, and the time just goes and your steps obviously build up. The worst thing is when you forget and you get home, it's cold and dark, and so you can't film outside, and then you realize, oh no, I've got 3,000 more steps to do. What am I going to do now? What do you think of this, like, Dracula style house? It's really cool. It's the only thing that I don't like is perhaps the windows could have been a little bit bigger, but who am I to judge, right? This house is pretty amazing. So watching European and British news right now is a really difficult watch. It's almost like they're trying to position things in a way that doesn't make them look like, you know, they've completely lost out with everything they've done here, because basically they cannot admit, that it's impossible for them to admit that they have no control over what's happening at the moment. And so they're coming out and saying things like, you know, we're thinking that we're happy to support the US as long as they stick to a certain few rules and stuff like that. And look, the US and Russia, whatever deal they come out with, it doesn't matter what the UK say or what Germany say or anyone else says, and that's the harsh truth, and they've just been sidelined. And so they're trying to save grace. And what I've noticed the BBC are doing right now is making lots of different stories about atrocities and people living under oppression and difficult things that are going on in Ukraine, and how bad the Russian people are, just trying to get all of that out there as quick as possible, because they need to change that public opinion, because at the end of the day, the public wants peace. And Europe and the US and Ukraine for a long time have been saying, yeah, we want peace, but the Russians don't want it. Well, now, what are they going to say? Obviously, they're going to say, yeah, we want peace, but not on those terms, right? But it's never been realistic, ever, that Ukraine were going to win. And finally, somebody is admitting that and saying, look, it was never going to happen, okay? It is stupid. So let's make a deal with Russia and stop it. And suddenly they've all been sidelined, and they're like, well, what do we do, right? And so these news stories that they're creating right now, it's just, it's awful to watch. It really is. It's just, it's cringe. When the snow's covering everything up, it kind of looks nice and picturesque, doesn't it? Even like the building blocks that are left here on this building that's kind of half done, you can't see it because of the snow. This nice tree in the garden of this house. Another thing is the foreign media right now are really struggling to position Donald Trump as this evil person. But it's difficult for them to do that, because he's showing the world that, look, I want to end this war. And a lot of people are saying in the media, look, Donald Trump just wants to take Ukraine's natural resources, right? But hang on a second. It was Ukraine that approached America to say, look, support us in the war and you can take our natural resources. And what Donald Trump is saying is, we'll support you by ending the war and take your natural resources, because we've already been helping you and giving you hundreds of billions of dollars worth of aid. And so what can the foreign media say about that? They can say, oh, look, he's trying to steal it. No, he's saying the exact thing that would give America their money back for helping, and also guarantee the fact that there will be no war in the future, and also end the war. And what can foreign media say to that? They can try and find ways to say that, look, Donald Trump is all about money. No, these resources were offered to the US to continue backing Ukraine. Donald Trump has said, we will take these resources and we will do better. We will support you to make sure the war finishes. Now, of course, that is not what Ukraine wants. That is not what Europe wants. They want the war to continue. But Donald Trump has turned around and said, we're going to end it. And how can Europe argue with that? They can't, can they? They can't say, oh no, we're against ending it. Hang on a second, don't you want to end it? Isn't that what everybody wants? So they can't say that. They can of course say that we want the war to end in a result that will be beneficial to Ukraine. But that's unrealistic. And we've all known that that's unrealistic. And we've known that from the beginning. Just because in the media they've been saying, yeah, Ukraine are going to win and blah, blah, blah. It was never going to happen. And finally, the new US administration have come out and said it. And they're going to do everything to end the war. And what can Europe do? Apart from assassinate his character, of course. Some of the older houses from the original village. So one of the things that Donald Trump has said is that Zelensky is a dictator, and he has kind of conned and used America to send them all that kind of military aid. And well, I don't really completely agree with that, because I think that America in the previous administration had a huge hand in that. America's goal, right? America's goal was to have the war there. America's goal, you know, we all know about the history of the conflict. We all know about the Maidan revolution. We all know about who backed people in that. We all know about the funding that went to Ukraine from the CIA and from the US. We know about that, right? So for Trump to say that, look, this is all done by Zelensky and he's just conned the US, well, I don't believe that. The previous US administration were heavily involved in this whole thing right from the beginning. They wanted the war, they wanted sanctions, they blew up Nord Stream. You know, we can't try and pretend that this was all Zelensky, you know, conning the US, right? Yes, the US sent $200 billion to Ukraine, but it was US weapons that they sent, right? So that money went from the US government to the US weapons manufacturers. So we shouldn't, you know, act as though it was all Zelensky that somehow, you know, bluffed the US into helping. That's just ridiculous, okay? The US are just as guilty in this whole, in fact, the US are more guilty in this conflict than anyone else at all. Of course, the new administration is behaving different. But this brings me on to something which is an interesting topic, which is international law. Now, the European Union and the previous US administration said, look, we want the war to end and we're going to have UN, NATO troops on the ground to stop this from happening. Now, this was never, ever, ever something that Russia would have allowed, ever. The whole problem is because of the NATO expansion. And the NATO expansion is something that the US orchestrated, right? The US orchestrated NATO expansion. Right? The US wanted Nord Stream pipeline to be blown up. The US wanted to control the European gas markets, right? So to say these things, right, is just ridiculous. This is the first time I've walked down this part of the village, and it's interesting to see these old houses. Look at this one. Wow, obviously it was one house there, and then they built onto the sides, look, and made it this huge thing. And over time, look at this gate. We've got this fence here with this gate, and we've got all these other objects kind of holding the fence together that they've put there over time. Look, they've nailed them on and stuff, and they've had holes. Very interesting. And if we come further down, you can just see how many more things they've added to the fence over the years to patch up all the holes. And so because of this, I've got to say that international law is just a joke. What are the point in contracts, in agreements, because agreements can be broken at any time. America orchestrated this whole Russian-Ukraine conflict, and they were the key player in making sure that Russia was sanctioned heavily, that this war continued and killed so many people. There were agreements made before the war that were agreements that were broken. Then there were contracts that were ready to be signed, new agreements on the table to stop the war after 3 weeks. They were stopped. And America were so against Russia. They wanted to do everything to make this war as costly as possible for Russia. And then suddenly we've got a new administration who want the complete opposite. And that is great for Russia. That is brilliant, right? They're talking about sanctions being lifted. They're talking about MasterCard and Visa coming back and McDonald's somehow coming back. Well, we'll get into that in another video. And so much more, right? And this is great for Russia. Incredible news for Russia. I'm overjoyed with this. It's absolutely amazing. It's almost unbelievable. It's like a dream, right? I could never have expected this outcome so quickly. But then it makes you think, this administration have done a complete U-turn and the war's going to end. They're going to make promises. They're going to say Ukraine will never join NATO. They're going to say that we're going to have this peacekeeping force to stop the war from starting again. And the BBC and a lot of these other European news stations, they're saying, look, this is what Russia wants. Russia wants to stop the war so that they can rearm and then have another go at Ukraine when Donald Trump leaves office. That's what Ukraine wants. Ukraine wants the respite so that they can rearm and have another go at Russia when Donald Trump leaves office, when a new administration comes into the US government and they say, we're going to reverse everything that Donald Trump said, we're going to go back on everything that he did, everything that he said is no longer viable anymore. We're ripping up all those contracts and we're going to go back and we're going to back Ukraine, and they've been given 4 years to get their act together and go again. And for that reason, I don't trust international law. Let's say that they come to an agreement now, the war finishes, everything's great. What is stopping them in 4 years' time from saying, that was under the previous president, we don't agree with that, we're ready to start again? So I think I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say. The main thing is that, wow, it is incredible. We could see an end to the war, which is great for everyone. But at the same time, just to recap, international law, I think, is a joke. You can never trust countries in what they say or do. Of course, I'm really glad with the new stance that the US have made against Zelensky and highlighting exactly who he is. However, at the same time, it was the US that were the main instigator in this war, right? Not just the war. In the years leading up to the war, in NATO expansion, in trying to take over European gas markets, in so much more, in making sure that the whole war continued, supplying weapons to Ukraine, forcing Europe to sanction Ukraine and getting them to behave kind of like, I don't know what the word is, I guess bravely. Because at the end of the day, we know how the world works. Everyone does what the US says because everyone needs to be friends with the US if they want to do well. And so Europe have actually sacrificed loads by backing the US in the war against Russia, and now they've been left out in the cold. Now, I'm not going to say that, you know, oh, poor Europe, oh, I'm so sorry for them, because they should have stood up for themselves and made decisions based on what they thought was best, instead of making decisions based on, well, if we say and do this, then the US will like us better, and maybe we can have a, you know, a better relationship with them, which will be better for us. Because at the end of the day, that's what most countries do. And I think most countries will also now look and say, look, we should make our own decisions. Because if we just blindly agree every time the US tells us to do this, then, you know, it could all become a complete disaster, which it has done for Europe. So I want to actually make another video about I've seen the far right, and this is how the UK are positioning it anyway, that the far right have come second in the German election, right? They're the second, highest rated party, and they're talking about why this is, and positioning them as Nazis and all that stuff. And it's a very interesting topic, because we all know why the right won, or didn't win, but have a high percentage of the vote in Germany. But what the media do, what the foreign media do, is position anyone that has the mindset of, hang on a second, what's going on with immigration, as far right. And this is completely crazy. Now, this is a topic for another video, but I think it's a video worth making. So let me know in the comments what you agree with, what you don't agree with, and what other topics like this would you like to see me cover in this kind of walk and talk video. I'll see you in the next one. I couldn't not film this buchanka coming up the road at the end.